even though it is about you and your struggles, think about the impact and the importance that you actually play in people's lives. You are important and you are capable and you can survive.
Someone cares about you.
There's a reason why your heart is beating.
You still have a purpose.
Don't give up.
It's important to know that you're not alone.
You're not alone.
You're not alone.
You are not alone.
Walking can be more than just exercise. It's simply enjoyable and gives us a chance to reflect. Today, we're thrilled to have Ryan Hunt join us on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast. Ryan is an Army veteran who looked out for his troops on the battlefield and is now giving back to the community in big ways. I first met him at the Entrepreneurial Boot Camp for Veterans last March, and since then, he hasn't slowed down. He's running Pando Commando and 10th Mountain Recruiting, and even dipping his toes into publishing with a new magazine launch. Ryan, welcome to the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Thank you, Danny. It's a privilege to be here.
Absolutely. Well, it's a privilege to have you because I know that you don't share your story often, and for you to come on here and be willing to talk about what you've been through is going to be a big help. And as our listeners hit start on their Strava app and set out for their stroll, it would be great to hear a little bit about what life was like growing up for you.
Sure. Life growing up for me, I was born in Riverside, California. Lived on and off all my life in Las Vegas, but between that, my father was an avid entrepreneur. So by the time I was 11 years old, I had traveled to over 20 countries and lived in a few as well. I went to school in the Philippines, went to school in Mexico. So really got a very good education in business as a young kid, and got to see and got to be exposed to a lot of different cultures, different ways of thinking and doing business. And I think that's what's inspired me to be an entrepreneur as well.
Wow. Is that also kind of what led you into the military, moving around that much, having those different life experiences?
Well, my father, I was in college, and my father was diagnosed with phase 4 liver cancer. And unfortunately, he had about 6 months to live. So I actually left college to take care of him full time. When he passed, it was very difficult. And then within 4 months, my grandfather actually passed away too. So just really two huge traumas for me. I was 21 years old, and I felt like going into the Army, I was really knocked off balance when that happened, as you can imagine, as a young person, a college kid. So I figured joining the Army would satisfy this desire to serve in the military, which we do. My family has a legacy of serving in the military. I also wanted to get college money originally. That changed when I left. Sergeant Hunt left the Army in April of 2001. And then I went back to college. And then as I came out of one of my classes, early September 11, 2001, there was a TV pulled out in the student union, and we watched as the horrible events of 9/11 unfolded right there live, about 6 hours from where I was going to school. So that's really what inspired me. The second time I went back was a complete calling to return to the military and serve not only the country but lead soldiers. I went from being enlisted. I joined Army ROTC at my college and went off to complete my military career and fulfill that calling that I had to serve the nation and to serve soldiers.
You know, when you're talking about just that first time that you went, the enlisted, joining the military in itself can affect us in a very traumatic way. Not that it's a bad type of trauma, but that it changes us. And that's the purpose of boot camp being as intense as it is, the withdrawal from normal society to change us. But to compound that with the loss of two important figures in your life suddenly as a young man, and then experience additional trauma, and then come back because of the trauma that the country experienced. What was your time and your career in the Army like, since it was kind of prefaced around all of this very intense emotion and events?
I felt, like I said, it was a calling. So I was really focused on that. and I felt really a sense of importance doing it. I'm sure a lot of your listeners feel the same way as they go off to serve the nation. That's really how I felt during my entire service, was just really feeling the importance of serving the country and taking care. And it became more important to take care of soldiers uh, as my career advanced. Originally, being a young private, my mindset was different. And as I became an NCO, no one is more professional than I. Prior to 9/11, the Army was a lot different place. And during that first enlistment or contract, uh, I think that I avoided a lot of the things that happened to me before I entered service. I avoided just dealing with those feelings of my father's passing. Especially, my father was everything to me. He was a great mentor and a coach. And it wasn't actually until I was in Iraq the first time, midway through, I was getting ready for a combat patrol, that I broke down for the first time, and I actually cried, you know, and had an emotional moment, and wished that my father could just be there for just a few minutes to give me some, sage advice.
Yeah, the second deployment I went on, I didn't have uh, a close relationship with a lot of my family growing up, and when I had joined, um, kind of like yourself, I didn't have the mindset for others until I became a corpsman, and was honestly on my second deployment as part of a MIT team. And as soon as we had arrived in country, I lost a grandmother that I had met and started getting close to just prior to deploying. And that was the first loss that I had experienced at that age. And then once we started losing troops, Iraqi soldiers and Marines, to the events out there, it started to change me in ways where I just wanted to continue to be able to be of service and go back and help as many people as possible. What was that mindset for you as now an Army officer serving post 9/11 in combat? I know eventually you ended up on a similar military training team where you were teaching people that were once our combatants how to employ tactics to defend their own country.
Yeah, that's a great question. And my first deployment as an officer, as a young lieutenant, was leading combat patrols. I was actually a field artillery officer, so I had combat patrols, and I also had two hot guns, two artillery guns. And going from the first deployment in 2005, 2006, where it was focused on the enemy, and then immediately I came back and I volunteered to join a mid team. I was back in Iraq 6 months to the day that I left. And as I entered that deployment, it changed, because I realized that the people that I was there for, it no longer mattered. The flags fell off. It was about the man or the woman. And I was really serving, both the Iraqi and the American army, and trying to do what was best, ultimately on a micro level, to try, at least from my perspective, to get American troops out of Iraq. And I kind of say that a little with a bit of a smirk, as we're still there, right? Maybe not in a direct combat role, um, but it was important, and to raise, the Iraqis' ability to sustain themselves. So my time as a combat advisor was a little bit different. We arrived boots on ground in Baghdad, and our whole mission was to build an Iraqi army division from 90 staff officers up to 9,000 Iraqi soldiers. One of my focuses, aside from doing the usual combat stuff that you do with the Iraqis, including, unfortunately, being hit by an IED during that deployment, um, which is just it's the nature of the beast. The focus was really on recruiting, a huge piece of it. I will say this, and it's not really part of the question, but recently, and you got to love technology, because I was there in 2007, right, 2008, and recently, maybe about 2 months ago, I actually Facebooked, videoed one of my counterparts. He's now retired, a general, Iraqi general, and he's actually in the Iraqi government now. But we used Google Translator to go back and forth and actually carry on a somewhat meaningful conversation and catching up. So the reason I say that, those relationships, even after all of this time, a decade plus later, are still important to me. And it doesn't matter whether when you go to war, it no longer matters really whether they're Iraqi, whether they're white, black, Chinese. It no longer matters. It's we're here for a shared purpose.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was over there, it's funny that you talk about that particular team, because it was relatively early in my career that I showed up in Iraq as a military advisor. I was an E4 at the time, assigned to a team of 11 other people, all outranking me by at least 2 or 3 ranks, from E6 to O5, and I'm the low man on the totem pole. But we all got so close, not just with one another, but with our counterparts in Iraq, in the Iraqi army. And a lot of that was through the use of our interpreters to be able to communicate and build out, curriculum plans for training days. Even though most of the training for us was on the road, it was, engaging with the enemy, because there's no training grounds in Iraq. The entire battlefield is their training ground. They were doing it in person. When you talk about the nature of the beast, I remember 4 close calls with IEDs surrounding my vehicle. Luckily, we weren't hit directly, but still feeling the heat from the blast, still feeling the shock of the explosion, and then waiting for the subsequent ambush that would take place, the gunshots to go off afterwards. It drew us all so close together. And then coming home, and I think this was my hardest part, because you're part of a small team. Coming home, none of those troops are with you. Your hodgepodge team is disbanded, a lot of them back into leadership roles, yourself included as an officer. What was your next assignment after returning home and no longer being a part of this transition team? And how did that affect the remainder of your career?
So we got back and we were dismantled almost immediately and off to the 4 winds. I don't think we were on Fort Riley more than 96 hours. I mean, it was the most efficient thing I ever saw in my life. Within a few weeks of deploying on that deployment, I was a first lieutenant. Actually, I was one of very few first lieutenants selected to go on a MIT team, and I was promoted while I was doing my training. In all fairness, I was promotable to captain, and so when I got back, I went to what's called the Captain Career Course, and then I did some schooling. The Army rewarded me for volunteering, which is what I did. Also, I should say that when I returned during the first deployment, I resigned my commission. I returned to the Army to serve the country and to lead soldiers into combat. It was very naive, to be honest with you, that the way that I thought. Even though I had already been in the Army, I had been on a peacekeeping operation. Iraq in itself was a different animal altogether. So I resigned my commission. I was ready to get out of the Army. I was about to hit my 3-year mark, and I got back, and I felt like I hadn't completed my mission, and I actually rescinded my resignation. And it had allegedly, I say allegedly, gone through. And then I called branch and I said, I'd like to volunteer for the SMIT team. They're like, well, you resigned commission you're getting out in 90 days. And by the way, we don't usually take first lieutenant. So I wasn't selected because I was so awesome. I was selected because I sold myself into the gig. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll rescind my commission, or my resignation rather, if you put me on the mid team. And they did. So I got back, I went to schooling, and during my deployment, I was actually called, which I was called from the United States on the green phone in my office, which was very shocking to me. It was ROTC Cadet Command. And they asked me if I would be a part of an Army pilot program to be the first full-time green to gold recruiter, and to bring enlisted soldiers, help them transition into college and become, with the ROTC program, and then graduate from college and become Army officers. And so I decided to take that assignment against professional wisdoms and guidance from some of my superiors. I did it. And I feel like it's one of my legacies. If I was to have a legacy in the Army, my time serving as a green to gold recruiter would be it. I contracted over 200 enlisted soldiers to go off and become Army leaders. It was one time where the Army for sure got it right, where we got to select the people that we wanted to become the next leaders of the Army, as second lieutenants. I still talk to a lot of them and watch their careers. Most of them, I don't know most of them, but quite a few of them now outrank me, to watch their journey, from being enlisted to becoming Army officers, and how that changes their journey, their career, but also changes their family for the better.
I love that was your legacy. I know quite a few of my friends during that time get recruited from the Navy, from being a corpsman into the Green to Gold program. And the fact that you found your purpose in raising up the future leaders, being able to prepare them for the next step. After such a legacy and a career that grew, what eventually led you then to leave the Army and transition back into civilian life?
Well, I left there. I took command. I went on to do the typical Army officer assignments. I was it's called an S3, a chief of operations and training. And then I decided at some point to become to go functional, to choose a functional area, which was simulation operations in the Army, and their wisdom sent me to the National Training Center, where I managed really the instrumentation system. If you have been to NTC, it's the Star Wars building where the battlefield, things that are happening on the battlefield are being beamed back to this big building, this very secret building, and you can watch the battle unfolding, similar to Ender's Game or something, a video game. It's all unfolding there. So I did that, and then I went, very small time, I went to JBLM, Fort Lewis, formerly Fort Lewis. And I went there to serve as a physical evaluation board adjudicator, and adjudicating medical cases, helping them to figure out if they're being medically retired, or they're going to stay on service, whether they're fit to remain on service. And I'll tell you, that was very difficult. A lot of pain in those files. Some that weren't necessarily shouldn't have been in front of me, but a lot of things that I saw, a lot of things from a very, very high level, and especially things that do with military sexual trauma. Very painful. I'll tell you, with everything that had happened in my life, as I'm coming back to this assignment and even thinking about it, a lot of it kind of was coming back and looping back, the pain, and then the transference from seeing all these different things that were happening to soldiers, and some of the in service or injustices that were being that were occurring, and I wish people that were serving in the military would put themselves in the boots of other soldiers and really understand, some of these things that they're going through and some of the pain that occurs, and then for it to arrive in such a manner in front of my computer, in front of my desk, and just be like, wow, I can't believe this is here right now, and the journey to get here, the journey that this and I don't want to call it a folder. It's not. It's a person, and it was hard to see that and to realize that so many leaders were failing out there. They were failing their soldiers, and it made me reflect on myself as a leader, and maybe the times that I failed. Some of that could have been ignorance, really, lack of education, and lack of empathy. I think in a lot of cases, and it's sad. And I'm glad when I see things in the news and improvements that are occurring.
It's really awesome that the public has been made more and more aware of the things that our military members are going through, especially in terms of military sexual trauma. And people are being more and more heavily educated on the roles that leadership has in allowing these behaviors to continue. But that's not always been the case. And more education, in my opinion, needs to surround this so that we can start to develop the empathy and the lack of ignorance about what it is that we're talking about when we're talking about military sexual trauma. So what is it that you saw and the changes that you're starting to see the Army acknowledge?
Well, I think the Army is giving away, or the Department of Defense, the military as a whole, is giving up the whole military sexual traumas off, or handing that off, and they're not going to be responsible for adjudicating that. And I think having that outsider perspective is definitely going to help with that. I guess I will tell one story, because I really felt like it was a huge failing, and it just sticks in my mind every time I hear military sexual trauma. And it's one case, and again, as I said before, it's a person. Okay, I fully as I say here, I'm like just thinking about the leadership failure and the failure to that soldier. So she was on an installation, to be unnamed, and there was a barracks party, as there often are barrack parties, and things definitely got out of control. And she took to her chain of command that she, had been raped. And her chain of command, did the initial investigation at their level, but it was never pushed up. And from the case, it looked to me like they had swept it under the rug. And to compound the insult to injury, she was 4187 to another installation. And before that case arrived to me, she floated around this installation with really no chain of command and no one really over her for years. And it was documented. It was a complete failure. So I'll tell you what I did. I adjudicated in her favor, 100%, so that she could medically retire with honor, with her full benefits, for sure. But it just thinking about it, just her journey, and I'm sure the pain is not over, must have been painful and lonely and a betrayal. So just very difficult to even think about it right now. It's making me, emotional just thinking about it. And that was one part, as I was kind of going back to the very beginning of this before I started rambling away, is that there's really such thing as transference. And it wasn't just that. It wasn't just exclusive to military sexual trauma, just the whole the different conditions and stuff. It was very difficult. And I started thinking about myself and becoming very introspective of my journey, prior to the military. So it started coming back full swing. And from my father's passing and my grandfather's passing, and now everything that had occurred during my Army journey, being shot at, being blown up, and in even my betrayals, that had occurred. And I got to that point, and I knew during that assignment that I acknowledged that I had PTSD. To myself, I felt like I did. It wasn't diagnosed at that time. I acknowledged that there were things that were not exactly 100%. And I also realized that I was tired. And I had made a promise to myself that when I felt tired and when I felt like my mission was done, it was time to take the uniform off. And so that's essentially what I did shortly after that. And I retired. But that's part of the journey. And I would say, just to add to it, and we're talking about pain, and we're talking about these traumas, and we're talking about betrayal. So when I left service, I originally went to Las Vegas, which was my home, as I mentioned. And one night I was coming back. I was out visiting some friends on the Las Vegas Strip, and I was coming back. It was late, probably about 2:00 in the morning, and I'm coming off the exit onto the 215, and I see a car accident. So I pull over. The car's smoking. I pull over. I have, probably because of my traumas, I have a first aid kit and a tourniquet. And I grab my phone and I start running back to the car. And I get to the car and I'm looking inside and I can't see the person. And I'm looking around, and over off to the side of this exit, there's two guys standing there. They're like, "Hey, we're over here." I'm like, "You guys okay?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're fine." And they're chatting. They're kind of laughing. And I go over there. I'm like, "Do you need my phone?" "Oh, yeah. No, we don't need it. We weren't in the accident." I'm like, "What?" "No, it's her." And there was, on the road, there was a lady, and she was gargling. She was choking to death. And I'm like, "Did you call 911? No." And I went down, and started assessing her. She was turning blue. I immediately cleared her airway, and I held her hand there. I called 911, and unfortunately, she passed. It was very hard for me, but what affected me the most was the humanity. And this ties in with, everything that occurred in my life, and it occurred even with this case, all these cases, and just feeling on some level that I wish I could have done more for her, honestly. I wish I could have done more for some of those soldiers that I adjudicated their cases on. And it doesn't matter, soldier or civilian. That's really how I felt. And I was like, here's another betrayal, the humanity. If they had picked up the phone, maybe those extra few minutes could have made the difference. But they didn't, for whatever reason. It's baffling. Anyways, thanks for letting me share that.
Absolutely. And it's never in any ways. That's really heavy, Ryan. I can still see the toll that the end of your career and your beginning transition into things that happen into the world that very few people get insight into. Those PEB, those medical evaluation board, those reviews of people and their career in the Army, and seeing that, what began to help you work through this transition? And how did you get to the point where you're now getting involved in helping people find their purpose after the military, whether it's through comedy and gear on Pando Commando, or a new career opportunity through 10th Mountain Recruiting? Like, what helped you get to that point?
I'm not going to say I'm perfect, but what I think is important, when I finally went to behavioral health, I finally started going to therapy. It was just normalizing it with myself. I think that a lot of people had a lot of my family members, I would visit them from time to time. They noticed the change, and I just was avoiding uh, acknowledging it, acknowledging that there was something that I had changed so dramatically during my time in service. And just going to therapy, much like going to the gym, which I need to go to the gym a little bit more, going or walk. I need to start walking 1 mile every day more, but going and making it part of a habit. And over time, dealing with those issues, talking about those issues, even though it's still painful to talk about those things, to talk about, for example, this incident that wasn't even part of my military service. It happened after. It's important to get out there, to be introspective, to really learn about yourself and to understand who you are as a person. And you can do some of that, a lot of that with therapy. It helps you to get out there and start communicating and to talking and to think about things from a different perspective. So I think that's really, that helped. That was really the key to being able to start dealing with those things, and then, helping to make my transition a little bit more successful.
One of the things that I've really appreciated about therapy and having talk therapy is that it provides almost a reassurance of trust, because they're an educated person that has insight into whatever conditions we may be going through. That's what we're taught. That's what we're told. That's what we experience, because they have years and years and years of schooling. And so they can hear us and then begin to make assessments and help us develop plans. And we trust that. But then the other option, and then in addition to that, is we have peers. We have people that have been there. And that's what we try to really promote here on the 1 Mile, One Veteran community, is that we've walked in very similar shoes. You and I have walked in very similar shoes, trauma prior to the military that then led us into the military, that got compounded with additional traumas and traumatic events, whether that's combat, whether that's exposure to other people being hurt by a chain of command that they should have trusted. I mean, there's so much that we've all experienced collectively that we can then talk to one another and share our experiences, our strengths, and our hopes. And so, for yourself, the therapy is amazing. And one of the things that I've also loved about it, and I've really appreciated this, because you and I, we met just about a year ago at the time of this recording. And I think within one of our first or second conversations, you were already beginning to open up, because you knew how important it was to be able to share your experiences with another person. And the other thing that you now do that I also want our listeners to know about is you are an entrepreneur, as you had initially set out to do from childhood. You run multiple businesses, you connect and you network, and you do a lot of this stuff. It seems like just from the core of who you are. And so, as a veteran-owned and operated company, why do you believe hiring other veterans and military candidates could be beneficial for communities and businesses as a whole?
Everything being equal, for any particular job, meaning a person that hasn't served in the military versus a person that served in the military. Education, everything is the same, minus the military service. And I think the major difference has to do with commitment, actually. They have soldiers, sailors, airmen, Corps, all of the above, have the ability to make a commitment to a vision, to a mission, and to drive through it, to drive towards that with soft skills in tow, that they learn over time. There's very few people in their late 20s or 30s, for example, have the opportunity, such as I did, to grab what's called grabbing the guide on and leading over 200 soldiers from a little dusty border town of El Paso, Fort Bliss, all the way to Iraq and back in its closing days. That's a lot of responsibility. That's a lot of equipment, millions and millions and millions of dollars of equipment, and 200 plus people that you have to take care of, ensure that they're okay, day to day, whether that's professionally or in their personal lives, to keep their head in the game. So huge responsibilities. And that's not just at the commander level, that's at every level. As a sergeant, I was put into a staff sergeant position. I had 2 years and 3 months in the military at that point. I had a team of forward observers. I was a 13 Fox, a Fister, or forward observer. And I had all these people underneath me. What did I really know about leadership at that point? Zero, really. But I had an opportunity to train to become a leader. I'm still training to become a leader. So that's that, really. And it does come from my helping the veteran community, does come from my core. I was at that same boot camp that we went to. I gave a pitch about one of my companies, which is my executive recruiting firm. And I was called altruistic because I really have this thought of aligning, great talent, mostly military, with great opportunities. And so I really do have a passion for that, for trying to elevate the veteran community and give back as best as I can. But I would do it whether it was veteran or not, honestly.
That's really awesome. And you're right. Veterans do have a great set of skills. One of the, there was 2 pieces of career advice that I was given shortly after my transition. One by an artist friend of mine, because I really wanted to pursue an artistic adventure, coming from the medical side, going into the artistic career field was not intuitive for me. And so his advice to me was start doing it for free, and eventually you'll get paid for it if you really love it. And then the second piece of advice came from a director of human resources at a resort out in Hawaii. And he said, I believe that you could do any job better than most people as long as you believe in their mission. And I think that's one of the greatest things that I feel like veterans have at the core of who they are. If we believe in it, we're going to be able to do it so much better than anybody else, because we've already given up a sacrifice, a significant portion of our life to serve a mission that we wholeheartedly were willing to lay our lives down for. And so with that being said, what advice would you have for a transitioning service member entering the job market? Because it's, despite transition assistance, despite all the resources that are available, it's still scary, it's still stressful, and it's still something unknown to many veterans.
I think the first thing is to make a plan as far in advance as you can. Some people think very far out. Some can only think 3 months out. But building a plan at any point is key. Now, with that, understand, and we've had this drilled into us in the military, every plan falls apart on first contact. So have a plan for a plan. And I would also say that all these different resources that are out there are critical to building that plan. Go explore, especially as you're beginning to make that transition. Go explore, learn things, network, talk to people, decide what your try hard. This is going to be the difficulty here, at least for me. The Army, for 2 decades, was a passion. It was a calling until it wasn't. It's still a passion, actually, but until it wasn't. Now you're going to be asked to transition out of the military. Your whole identity is going to be removed as you take off your uniform and throw it in, like I did, into a storage. It's all wrinkled. My uniform's all wrinkled now. And the only piece of military swag I have in my house is, my ribbon rack over here, only because it fell out of a desk drawer, and my guidon. Those are really the only 2 pieces of military items that I have in my house right now. So your identity, your passion, your whole belief system is going to change. So you need to figure out what the next passion is. So if you build a plan and you drive towards, you create that mission and you drive towards that vision, you'll more than likely be successful. There's a lot of people out there and a lot of resources that are going to help you. I think one stop is very obvious. Veteran Affairs. Make sure that you got that part of the deal straight. And what I mean by that is if the Army broke it or the military broke it, they got to fix it or at least take care of you. VA.gov, Veteran Affairs website, is a great website to go to. Danny, you know this, we went to the Institute for Veterans and Military Families, the EBF, and because we're entrepreneurs, I have entrepreneurial spirit. You don't necessarily have to be an entrepreneur, really, but that's a great program right there. That's a great institution. They're actually partnering now, or I think they've taken over Bunker Labs. So you have a great resource there through Syracuse University. I don't work for Syracuse University.
That's really awesome, and that's great advice. Come up with that plan, and then realize that plans fall apart upon first contact. But when you talk about the IVMF, the Institute for Veteran and Military Families, and the programs that they have, and their union with Bunker Labs, you're doing something that a lot of people do when it comes to networking and merging ideas, merging communities, is later on this year, and you've invited me as one of your speakers, which I'm thrilled about. You've invited me to be a speaker at the Veteran Social Summit later on this year. What is this? What inspired you to create it? And what can people expect to get out of it?
So the event will be held on 4 and 5 December later this year. You can find it at www.veteransocialsummit.com. And the mission is to grow, unite, and elevate the veteran community. And as part of that, we're giving out free tickets to multiple transition centers across the globe so that active duty members for free can tune into this. What it is, just to clarify, is it is a social, as the name it implies, it's a veteran social summit. So we're bringing together veterans, we're bringing together veteranpreneurs, we're bringing together just veterans as a whole, active duty members, to talk about entrepreneurship in different aspects of that, to talk about mental health issues. And to talk about transitioning out of the military. There's even a hiring fair component to it. So a lot of good information, a lot of great opportunity to go out there and to network with our brothers and sisters and to help them transition out, or at least maybe give them the next idea. Nike was founded, of course, by a veteran, a 10th Mountain veteran. So was REI, and half the ski resorts in Colorado after World War II were founded by military veterans, mostly 10th Mountain veterans. I have an affinity for 10th Mountain as I served there on and off for 12 years. Yeah, that's what it's about, and definitely want to encourage everyone to attend it. It's definitely going to be a great event. And what inspired me to create the event, it started with the idea, or the question really, can I do it? Can I, and this ties into our skills as veterans, can I create a summit? And in 2020, we created a virtual summit, the same Veteran Social Summit, and 583 people attended it. And I had I think I had 90-day lead up to it. I was actually very surprised to be fully transparent. And so I'm very excited. I think this time we're definitely going to meet that number, if not more. And we're going to have some really high quality people, such as yourself, that are going to be imparting their wisdom to the veteran community. I mean, that's a win-win situation.
That's really awesome. I'm looking forward to it. And it's resources like this, opportunities like this, that make the veteran community so unique to be able to support one another. We're unlike any other community that exists in the U.S., better than any fraternity at a college, better than any small business association, because we have experience working with like-minded people, and we all have a desire to just serve each other. And with that being said, there still remains ongoing struggles that we have, and we are uniquely positioned to help one another. And one of those struggles is our mental health crisis and the suicide crisis that is endemic throughout the world. We are uniquely positioned to help one another, which gives us a greater risk to survive this suicide crisis. What message of hope do you have for somebody that is currently battling with their own mental health struggles?
There's a community out there. There are people that will pick up the phone. Reach out. You have to reach out. You don't have to, but we hope that you do. We want you to. One thing with Pando Commando, and I'm not trying to plug, my business, that e-commerce site, but over the years, been in business 9 years, and I can't count the number of times that veterans have messaged Facebook, and I've actually gotten on phone calls with customers or people that have found their way to our social media feed. I did numerous times. And recently, being the last 6 months, I put a phone number on the top, and it's mainly for customer service issues. But I've had 2 people that have reached out there. One messaged me at 2:00 in the morning, and I was awoken by the buzzing sound, which I usually probably would have slept through it, but it woke me up. And I ended up having a conversation in the middle of the night, in the dark, with a veteran that needed someone to talk to. The hope is that there's people out there that we're here to support you, to help you work through those issues. I've had too many friends that didn't make that call, and too many people that didn't make that call and that aren't here with us. A few years ago, I think coming on 5 years ago, my former spouse and the mother of my 2 children, also a veteran, took her life. I was friends with her. I talked to her on a Friday, and on Sunday she was gone. The impact on the children is perpetual. It's awful. So even though it is about you and your struggles, think about the impact and the importance that you actually play in people's lives. Because you are an important person. You are important. And you are capable. And you can survive. And you will survive. But we're here to help you. Danny, me, the rest of the veteran community is behind you.
Thank you so much for sharing that message of hope. Thank you for being there for your surviving daughters, and thank you for helping somebody make it to the next day. If anybody out there wants to connect with you or support your businesses and support the mission that you're doing within our community, where can they find and connect with you, Ryan?
Well, most importantly, you can reach out to me via text 24/7. That number is 702-613-4970. I'm not an expert, but you can always reach out to me for sure. My businesses, yes, I have a little e-commerce called Pando Commando. And you can find that definitely on Facebook. You can Google Pando Commando. You will find us. But we are located conveniently at www.pandocommando.com. If you want some interesting Pando swag, I also run an executive recruiting firm, which you can find at 10thmountainrecruiting.com. And then we've already mentioned veteransocialsummit.com. And you mentioned and alluded to in the very beginning, we are starting a magazine online publication. That's a work in progress. I'll save that for another interview down the way. But it's Veteran Lifestyle Magazine. And soon enough, you will be able to Google it and find it.
I love it. Well, Brian, thank you so much. It's been a true pleasure catching up with your inspiring journey, learning more about what it is that you've overcome, who you've helped. And thank you so much for sharing your insights into the military service and the power of resilience on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Thank you, Danny. I appreciate it. And see you soon.
Yes, sir. And for our listeners, don't forget, you can also tune into the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast on Reese Across America Radio, accessible through iHeartRadio, Odyssey, and the TuneIn app.